Welcome back to the In Chamber. I'm your host, Tom Schumann. I'm not going to read the disclaimer we've shared on the last two episodes regarding potential sound quality issues. We're all living in this new normal, at least for now. So on we go with our conversations. Before we start, a couple of Indiana Chamber updates. We've announced recently our annual Human Resources Conference is going virtual. This is the 56th year of that event. Conference will take place May 5th through the 7th. Same exciting keynotes and other events that were planned, but really some additional bonuses. You can attend virtually a large number of breakout sessions, and those will be available until August 1st. So additional opportunities to learn even more from the great presenters, earn more continuing education credits. You can find out much more of that at indianachamber.com. And a reminder about our coronavirus resource page, indianachamber.com/coronavirus, the latest federal and state information to keep you updated on, help you cope with the situation and gain assistance in dealing with the coronavirus. Now on to today's episode and our guest. I've had two in-person interactions with this technology and innovation leader in a late 2018 roundtable discussion for BizVoice magazine. I quizzed him, among other things, about his title as a futurist. And on a visit early this year to the company's North American headquarters in Carmel, I was among several chamber team members to see firsthand some of the innovation that is taking place. Now, this is where you have to bear with me a little bit. Rob Martens, futurist, Chief Innovation and Design Officer for Allegion, President of Allegion Ventures, and founding principal of the Pin Tumbler Studio. Rob, welcome to the In Chamber.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me, Tom.
All right, I got you laughing already. So, Rob, how big is that business card you have to carry around with all those titles on it?
Well, I just try and stick with Innovation and Design Officer now.
Just a lot of different roles and responsibilities.
Yes, it's one of the joys of the role. You never know what you're gonna get each day. So I enjoy having a little bit of that variety.
Well, Rob, if you would give the listeners a little bit of a background, both of Allegion and the work it does here in Indiana, as well as your background and how you came to be part of the organization.
Sure. So Allegion is a pure play global provider of security products and solutions. So it's about a $2.8 billion business. As you mentioned, our headquarters, our regional headquarters is in Carmel, Indiana. We're technically headquartered in Dublin, Ireland. We were spun from Ingersoll Rand back in 2013, but I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit later. Allegion provides a platform for a lot of things associated with security products and solutions. So, for example, we have a very large portfolio of brands and companies underneath the Allegion umbrella that are mechanical solutions, such as locks, hinges, door closers, door exits, things of that nature. But we also have a lot of electromechanical products and digital solutions that allow for us to play in what's called the IoT, or the Internet of Things space. By way of my background, I was a CIO for 15 years, a Chief Information Officer for 15 years, and have focused on the emergence of Internet of Things as a large trend within industry, and switched from being a enterprise software deployer, which many of the CIOs are these days, into someone much more focused on product design, product delivery, and working on futuring for our business, which is very much of a strategy planning play for kind of peeking around corners, looking at adjacencies that might help us to prepare as a business.
So, Rob, are people surprised when you talk about what maybe they think about the industry, the doors, locks, security, but then you get into all the technology that's involved in it? It seems like a little bit of a counter there. but are people surprised about all the technology that is part of the industry?
Absolutely. I think, Tom, up front, they're surprised early, but once you start to look at kind of the trends, the mega trends, starting with those, like a mega trend, Tom, could be something like urbanization, right? But a trend below that, we do a lot of work in futuring, and a definition of futuring for us is pretty simple. Futuring is identifying these trends and then creating a relevant narrative for our business around it that allows us to plan, scenario plan, or position ourselves so we don't get surprised by things. So, for example, one of these trends is edge computing. And I think a lot of people have heard the term edge computing. A simple definition of edge computing is we're doing more processing on location. So, physically at the spot, we're still interacting with the cloud, but more of the activity is actually happening locally. And so, what's interesting is when you start talking about door hardware or security hardware, we have what we refer to as a very unique geography around the door. And I help to manage relationships, strategic partnerships with mega tech companies such as Apple, Amazon, Google, and the like. And they have mobile devices, obviously, that many of us carry in our pocket. But what they don't have is that unique geography within a building. And so all of a sudden, our products being connected products sitting within that unique geography around the door can do more processing locally and then share that with the cloud, providing a better experience. When you start to explain those types of things, for example, like the edge and our advantage with the edge, all of a sudden the light bulb goes off and people say, okay, now I really understand why Allegion is we're very much treated by the exchange and other places as a growth company. Even though our background, which is over 100 years, actually even in Indy, is of a mechanical nature.
Speaking of light bulbs going off, we'll come back to that later. One of the first products that we were able to see out of the Pin Tumbler Studio involving light, but we'll get to that in a second. So a couple years ago, Rob, the company started Allegion Ventures, one of those titles I mentioned of yours. A $50 million fund, but not your typical venture capital fund. Talk about some of the investments that have been made there, partnerships that have been formed as a result of that.
Sure, happy to do it, Tom. So Allegiant Ventures is really focused on adjacencies to our core business. So we're constantly looking for, obviously, to add to our core. We have been acquisitive. We have bought some companies, but we're also interested in peeking around corners and getting a view of what's going to happen in the future. And so Allegion Ventures plays in this adjacent area. So a couple of examples would be a company called Pindrop, which does voice recognition technology and can identify deep fakes. A company named HQO and Robin powered two different companies that focus on optimizing the experience for clients and people in commercial buildings and facilities. And then other companies like OpenPath, which I know we're going to talk about a little bit later as well, who are essentially data platforms tied directly to access control. And so what's a little bit unique about our fund as well is many people have corporate venture funds. Ours is slightly different than the norm in that it's meant to be an inclusive fund. The way that we do that is it's an engagement tool for our employees. So we have a very limited staff. There's actually no permanent full-time employees on Allegiant Ventures. We have myself, we have two principals, and we have a chief marketing officer. And then the rest of the calls and work that's done are being done by subject matter experts inside of Allegion.
So you're pulling the people from within Allegion who are the experts on certain areas.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's been just an incredible experience for them. And we get a lot of wonderful feedback from startups that we talk to. And you obviously you don't invest in everybody, and as a matter of fact, you invest in a small percentage But we get a lot of wonderful feedback, and it's been reputationally fantastic for the fund in that even if you didn't get an investment for us, chances are you had a great conversation with, whether it's a tax expert or a mechanical expert or an expert in any number of fields. So Ventures has been a great engagement tool for us, as well as we kind of mentor and support these businesses over a much longer time horizon. We, Tom, typically look at Ventures as an 8 to 10 year commitment.
So as opposed to maybe a shorter time frame where you're looking for that exit, or that a typical venture capital might be looking for.
Absolutely. And it all depends on the stage that you invest in. We tend to invest in a little bit earlier stage. For those people who are familiar with the terminology, we would be a Series A, Series B. But we do have more mature companies. For example, Pin would be a Series D round. But we typically invest earlier on in the process where we feel like we could have a more beneficial influence, and quite frankly, that we could learn the most from our interaction with those companies.
So Rob, you're investing in companies around the country, probably around the world a bit. What does it mean for Indiana, though, that these conversations are taking place with, as you say, people in not only your Indiana office, but beyond? How does it help that these technology companies around the world are aware of the work that Allegion's doing here in Indiana?
Well, I think it's imperative, and I know you and I are going to talk about it a little bit later in the conversation as well, but we tend to not do the best job all the time of bragging about what it is that we do well in Indiana. And I think it's important and imperative for people to understand what we're good at, so that they come here for that support rather than going somewhere else. And so for example, one of the companies that we've recently invested in is a company called OpenPath. They're based out of Los Angeles, but they have an office here in Fishers, Indiana. And it's so important.
And let me interrupt for a second. Did they have that office before they started working with you, or is that a result of this partnership?
They did have that office, but our level of engagement, and I think where we plan to help, we plan to do a lot of work with them here locally. One of the things that we try and do as a fund and as an entity is engage really deeply. It's not about just a financial investment for us. It's about sharing subject matter expertise, and it's about helping them grow their capabilities. And they have a nice office in Fishers, and if we do our job well, we think they will grow, and we think it'll grow opportunity here in the local area for them as well. And I will say, OpenPath is a well-known startup. It was very competitive to become an investor with them. And so we're really proud of that investment. But it's also really important for people in Indiana to know that Fishers is OpenPath's only remote office. So the fact that you've got a really fantastic Los Angeles-based startup company, and their one satellite office happens to be in Fishers, Indiana, should tell you something.
It is. That's an excellent statement. So Rob, Allegion itself, as you indicated earlier, it's been an innovative company for a long time, deep, rich history. But talk about new ideas within the company. Any company can take a long time to come to market. So that all changed late last year with the introduction of the Pin Tumbler Studio. I think I know where the name came from, but give the listeners an idea of the behind Pin Tumbler and how it works.
Sure. So, we have what we would refer to as 4 innovation engines at Allegion. So our first innovation engine is our core team. So that Vince Wanos, our CTO, Tracy Kemp, our chief digital officer, have wonderful teams of, Vince has hundreds of engineers across the globe, and we sometimes create our own, organically. Our second innovation engine is through our mergers and acquisitions arm, Patrick Shannon's team with John Pizzella. We have been acquisitive. Our third innovation engine was Allegion Ventures, and we just talked about that. It's an opportunity to invest and partner and peek around corners. And what we realized was we still had a gap, which was our typical development cycle can take anywhere from 18 to 24 months to get a security product to market. And that's has to do with a lot of testing and a lot of things, and the fact that we can't have certain types of things happen with a life safety product. And so we took a hard look at that and thought, what can we do in order to really improve there? And so we created Pin Tumbler Studio, whose primary focus is to actually go from concept to delivery into the hands of a consumer within 120 days. So we put together a small team of engineers and a small team of industrial designers and took a very aggressive stance. What's really unique about Pin Tumbler Studio is we took some of the same models that we had with Allegiant Ventures, which is we recognize that whenever you create a team and say, hey, this is a SWAT team of special people doing special things, those don't tend to last. If you talk to most CEOs or executives, those might last 2 years or something. And when you do a post-mortem on them and you ask, what happened, why, they said, well, it got, I wasn't really sure what they were doing. It felt distant from the business. I wasn't sure I was getting the value. And so what our goal with Pin Tumbler Studio was to have a highly inclusive entity that could go through and collaborate highly. So in addition to having that core team of what we would call engineering player coaches, they also, what we do is we have and are creating cohorts. So in other words, if you're a high performing member of the Allegion team and you've just come off of a big project, let's say it wasn't even, product related, it was a ERP deployment, or you did a great job on something in finance, you have the opportunity to be nominated to participate in one of these 120-day Pin Tumbler Studio cohorts so that you can be side by side with a player coach engineer and deliver product. The other beautiful thing about Pin Tumbler Studio for us is when you're working with startups, one of the challenges that you typically have is when you say, hey, what can we do for you besides capital? They typically say, hey, I'd like to do a proof of concept with you. Typically, you either get asked for doing a proof of concept or they want to leverage your distribution. That's particularly difficult, again, in a security space where reputationally you don't necessarily want to do that. There's a lot of risk. Well, Pin Tumbler Studio allows for us to work directly with startups and do less than 120-day proof of concept launches with them by creating new brands, going to market in completely new ways than they were anticipating. So the feedback has been interesting from the standpoint of we're actually able to move faster in many cases than the startups themselves are able to move.
Well, you mentioned 120 days a couple times, but as I recall, and I mentioned myself and some other chamber colleagues came out and saw the first product out of Pin Tumbler. If I recall, that was like 75 days. Is that correct? And if you would describe that product a little bit that you showed us that day earlier this year.
Absolutely. So we were very proud. We didn't know what to expect. So we put 120 days and then we launched the first in 70 business days. So we're very pleased with that. It was a product that we call Illuminati, which is actually, it is a doorknob that has a PIR sensor, an infrared sensor built into the cap of the product. And we refer to this as a techno-functional product. So in other words, it's not connected to the internet. From a privacy standpoint, there's no information being shared, but it is a smart product. So in other words, when you walk within the range of the product, it will light, provide some functional lighting on the door to let you know where the handle is, while at the same time, it's also quite beautiful. We got a lot of feedback from a variety of groups, some people saying, my goodness, this is such a practical thing to have in my geriatric facility, or other practical applications, but also a huge response from kind of a more artistic community saying, "Oh my goodness, this is a beautiful, wonderful thing." What we learned from it, which is a big part of Pin and Tumbler Studio's mission, is that when we wanted to put the sensor in the cap, we were unable to do that initially without exposing a lens, which is kind of ugly to look at, and most consumers don't like that. So part of the mission of Pin and Tumbler Studio is to find new technology. So we actually found a Swiss company that provided a substrate that looks and feels very much like the material on the knob, and the signal can go directly through that. And the sensor is set up so it actually gets a broad range. So from the side, you could walk up to it from the side or directly on, and it would light. So that technology, that new substrate, and that application of the PIR on it is something that we're now looking at leveraging across the broader Allegion portfolio, which includes things like exit devices. So, for example, if there was an emergency situation, the light could appear on a otherwise non-powered exit device, or in a number of other product instantiations.
Rob, I assume there's just so many ideas within Allegion. How do you go about determining what's next? It's not only ideas within the company, ideas with your partners that you're working with, the companies you've invested in. Is one of the challenges determining here's what we're going to focus on next, or are there a lot of next going on at the same time?
Well, I think you nailed it, Tom. I mean, it's all about prioritization and making a good choice. We have so many interesting products on the shelf. I think it's fair to say commercialization has a lot to do with our prioritization. We do have research projects with P&T and things like that, but we also have some other interesting work going on with local universities and other entities to get these products off the shelf and into the market. Allegion has a huge backlog of really fantastic solutions that have never seen the light of day, just because, again, there's only so many hours in the day and you're focused on optimizing the things you need to for business. But as we see, like I said, work that's going on at universities, other mechanisms that we're forming like Pin and Tumbler and other things, there's a lot of new opportunities to get these products out. And what's really interesting about that is not all of them are going to come out with an Allegion brand. They can be spun. There are very unique business opportunities. Some of these are independent businesses that will be formed and have their own distinct business plans, where we may be just an investor. So lots and lots and lots of opportunities. And I would encourage many of the other businesses that are listening to this podcast is this is a huge opportunity for everyone. It is a very unique time within our region, and you're starting to see capability, like I said, whether it's from universities or from private venture studios, the ability to take some of those ideas and some of that content off the shelf and get it out there and see some unique growth.
Yeah, you mentioned universities, Rob, and we have not talked about it in our prior conversations, but I know for the company, school security is such a huge area. Maybe if you could touch on that for a second, of Allegion's role in school security, especially in these times.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the most important focus areas for us. One of our probably most important products that we make has been made in Indianapolis for over 100 years. It's called Von Duprin, and it's built off of Toby Drive in Indianapolis, and it ships to the entire world, by the way. So if you get off an airplane in Dubai, you're going to hit an exit bar that was made in Indianapolis, Indiana. So great company, but they feed, and we feed a huge amount of that product into K through 12 schools. And we work in a very broad ecosystem. So you have purely mechanical products, you have electromechanical products, and you have digital platforms that connect in. And so we're very focused on ensuring that K through 12 schools have the best tools that will allow administrators and school resource officers to create the best possible outcomes for students when something does happen. Egress is something that is super duper important in case of a fire, in case of needing to exit the facility quickly. That's just as important as controlling who can come in to the facility. So we've made a number of investments and participate in a number of safety boards and industry associations to ensure that people are focused on the best practices and how we can do things in a safe way. We've seen some suggestions where the intent is really good, but people want to put in what we would term as barrier type of solutions, which ultimately are patently, in many cases, unsafe. So we try and take our knowledge in codes and applicable codes and regional differences with school construction and share those as broadly as we can and act as experts in the space to try and ensure that our kids have a safe, secure, and quite frankly, simple environment to work in so they don't feel like they're in a lockdown place.
So, Rob, I read a recent article in Forbes that featured you, and you were talking about some trends, that futurist part of your work. And three trends, they were all very interesting, but the one that kind of fascinated me the most was about voice recognition technology. What's not worked in that area, and what do you see potentially might be a big player in the future?
Yeah, so, voice recognition has gotten a lot of attention, and it's a really useful tool for a lot of different demographics. I think that's what the big appeal is, Tom. It doesn't matter whether you're in your 70s or 80s or whether you're in your, teens. Voice recognition is something that people are interested in and they use. One of the challenges we witnessed with it early on was I was actually at a meeting at Amazon talking about Alexa, and we had an opportunity to be one of the first locks to lock or unlock based on your interacting with Alexa. And the challenge is that Alexa is not smart enough at this point to distinguish with certainty between Tom's voice and Rob's voice. And so my feedback to them early on was, what are you going to do if you stand outside with a bullhorn and say, Alexa, unlock my door, and you're a bad actor?
Yeah.
And so that's where companies like Allegion play a strong role. We think about the security. And so to Amazon's credit, they came up with a scenario where you have to, if you're going to unlock your door, and you can do that with a Schlage product. Today, it would say, Alexa, unlock my door. And she would say, okay, Tom, what's your PIN code? Well, to me, from an experiential standpoint, that's not ideal. So we began to look very closely at what other options are out there for voice identification that have a higher rate of accuracy. We need in that 99.9% category in order to feel comfortable on a residential application that you are who you say you are with your voice. And so interestingly enough, we met a company through Ventures called Pin based out of Atlanta, Georgia. And they were using their product primarily in financial call centers. So think, big credit card companies or large financial institutions. And they were using it to identify known fraudsters who would call in to take advantage of things, try and open bogus accounts, do things that they shouldn't do. And they're experts also at identifying deep fakes. If you're familiar with that term, we see that with both video and with audio. So they have unique technologies and algorithms that allow us to ensure you are who you say you are. And so we've been taking a very deep dive into figuring out how can we apply that technology to locking platforms to make your experience when you walk in a building or unlock something more seamless. And in this case, as you can imagine, a simple application that everybody could understand that I think we'd be all interested in is if we had an auto opener on a door, all right, that we have for Americans with Disabilities Act compliance, if we had an auto operator and we had a voice ability, wouldn't it be wonderful in today's world with coronavirus to be able to say, please open the door, and have it recognize your voice and open the door for you and just you, where you didn't have to touch anything.
So Robbie, now you just ruined it for a lot of people. You just informed everybody that Alexa doesn't know everything. Can't tell our voices apart yet. We'll say yet.
Yes. Well, not to the degree that we need it. They can differentiate a little bit, but
yeah, not in all cases yet. All right, let's go. You mentioned it earlier. Let's go. This goes back to the first time we were together, that BizVoice magazine roundtable. You talked about humility and how one of Indiana's greatest strengths is really also among its weaknesses. Expand on that a bit. And again, we talk about it so often, what we can do and how Hoosiers need to be a little more boastful about many of the great things going on in our state.
When I go to conferences to talk, and I spend a lot of time doing media work, more than I had ever planned to do, people ask me about Indiana, and they say, why are you in Indiana? Describe Indiana in a word to me. And my word is competence. We have amongst the most competent workforces, whether it be mechanical, technological. It is just an incredibly competent workforce that we have that's incredibly dedicated, and they take their jobs very seriously. And I think that's born at a very early level, even in our schools, in that we value our citizenry. We value being good citizens and what it means to be a good citizen. What we also have is a habit of being overly humble, in my opinion. And I think we really need to communicate what we're working on and what we're excellent at in order to have bigger and better opportunities to collaborate. So my winning example would be the outcome that we saw with ExactTarget and Salesforce. Look at what happened there. Salesforce, a Silicon Valley powerhouse, sees ExactTarget, sees what Scott Dorsey and the team there are doing, and makes a great decision and is absolutely run with it from there. If we don't get out and communicate to people what it is that we're doing, they're never going to have the appreciation for the level of gravity that we have here. I could give a number of examples. I'll give you one tangible example. We really know how to build things here. Silicon Valley is very focused on connecting things. They're very focused on building software and things like that. Our special skill is we know how to build physical things, and there's a gap in the marketplace for taking those big, complex physical things and connecting them with that application layer, with that software layer. This is a huge opportunity for us, and I think it's someplace where you're going to see us grow, and you're going to see us really have incredible opportunities going forward over the next 3 to 5 years.
Well, you talked about Fishers earlier, and certainly the home of the IoT lab that's there, and just so many things in that community and in other areas around the state where you're exactly right. Indiana can be that crucial connector between what's built and those technologies that you talked about.
There's such a simple formula for it too, Tom. I think I talk about it all the time. I call it the 3S model, but it's, if we can focus, when you're going to connect something, if we can focus on 3 things, and it doesn't matter whether it's physical, a mechanical device, or a connected device, or a digital device, you can focus on these 3 things, you're going to be successful. 1 is that it's secure. 2 is that it's scalable. And 3 is that it's simple. if your product is secure, scalable, and simple, you have a great chance at success. Because I can tell you right now, in a more and more connected world, as we're starting to take things like door hardware that in the past had not been connected, as we start to take these really important things that are part of our core infrastructure and bring them online, or maybe we don't connect them per se, but they have more smart intelligence in them. If you can focus on the security, the scalability, and the simplicity, you have a huge advantage.
Which one of those is the most difficult to accomplish?
I think simple is probably the most difficult to accomplish. I mean, we are all experts in our fields. We know how to build things, but if you can't relate to it or you can't intuitively understand how to use it, you're either not going to use it at all, or you might not use it in the right way. So I think the magic that you can bring to people is making things simple.
Rob, just a couple minutes as we get ready to wrap up, some things away from the work that you do. What are things you like to do in your spare time?
Well, I think I'm really lucky in that my work ties off pretty favorably with my personal interests. So I probably, you could probably say I'm one of these people that work all the time, but my spare time is definitely dedicated to my family. I'm lucky to have been married for 25 years to Carolyn, who runs House Martens and is the master of ceremonies for all things. So typically my big job is to show up. We have 3 teenagers in the house, so very busy with school activities, everything from cross country all the way through to symphonies and all kinds of good stuff. So I have a very thankful for a wonderful partner at home who makes it easy for me.
Excellent. Last question. We've asked people, almost everybody on the podcast this season, think about success, whether it's professionally, personally, success today, success in the future, as it is with many of the things you work on. But what does success mean to you?
For me, success is feeling happy and fulfilled with what you're doing every day. It's having a meaningful connection with those people that you work with, where you feel more of a connection than simply being in a place where you get a paycheck.
Excellent words. Rob Martens, we'll go with Chief Innovation and Officer for Allegion as that primary title, along with all the other things we mentioned earlier. Thanks so much for joining us today on the In Chamber.
Thanks for having me, Tom. It's always great to visit with you.
Well, we appreciate it. And as you can tell hopefully from our conversation, so many things going on at Allegion and in the technology space, and how they're proving to be, as we said, that connector between things that are built in Indiana and those technologies that can take that and measure it and take those things to the next level. So again, we hope you've enjoyed our conversation with Rob Martens. Again, with the Indiana Chamber, a quick reminder about our upcoming HR conference, May 5th to the 7th, virtual. You get all the same great benefits of the content, along with virtual sessions. Other Indiana Chamber events also being conducted either virtually, the Wellness Council of Indiana, the Indiana Internet programs, both continuing on with their missions and meeting business needs. We mentioned, I'll put in one more plug, we talked in our conversation with Rob a little bit about humility and Indiana tooting its horn a little bit. Indiana Destination Development Corporation, we're going to have a conversation with Elaine Beadle coming up in early June, I believe. And that was, and started off as intended to be about tourism, but I think that mission's going to expand a little bit. And I think they're being charged a little bit with helping get that word out about many of the great things going on in Indiana. So look for that episode in early June. We'll be back next month in May, or in 2 weeks, with our next episode. Thanks as always for listening to the In Chamber.